Hi YouTube, welcome back. Firstly, I've got to apologise because I'm having some microphone issues today, so we're just raw dogging. I'm really hoping that the sound is bearable, but it was either that or no video, so here we are. I hope you're having a good week. A lot of my clients recently are talking about really wanting to smash the gym in the last few months of the year. A little bit more time is available now that summer's over, feeling like you've got a bit of that extra time and energy to be spending in your sessions. The weather is getting worse, it's getting darker, so the idea of the gym isn't quite as daunting as it may have been in July when it was 30 degrees and glorious outside. I wanted to talk to you today about how we can set our training up in the best way, and crucially, what some of the mistakes are that I see so often that are actually relatively easy to fix. If your goal is to become that gym girl that you want to be for the rest of this year, and you're wanting to see some of that muscle start to come through, looking like you lift, you're going to want to make sure you're avoiding these things. The first one is arguably the most important, and it's training without any kind of structure. So in other words, like you're consistent, you're going to the gym, but what you do on any given day is anyone's guess. You might do some squats over there, and then you quite like the lat pull down machine. So if it's free, you'll go and use that. You might do a bit of arms, you might do a bit of core, just depending on what you fancy on the day. Or maybe you've got a little folder on your Instagram of saved workouts that you'll sometimes cycle through. Maybe you've written down something random in your notes app, but really there's no structure from one day to the next or even 1 week to the next. Now, I'm going to say something controversial. If you are just stepping into the gym for the first time, it's probably okay to be a little bit more random with your workout selection, because frankly, doing anything is going to get you some progress. If you're going from literally 0 strength training sessions a week to 2 random ones that you've saved from Instagram, that is progress, and something is better than nothing. But truthfully, if you've been training for say more than 3 months and you are getting to the gym on a semi-regular basis, then you really do need to be following some sort of plan. I think the idea of like shocking your muscles or surprising your body comes from that inevitable feeling of soreness that you might get the next day. The term DOMS, that delayed onset muscle soreness that you'll tend to feel 24, 48 hours after a workout. DOMS and novelty go hand in hand. In other words, if you're just going in and doing random shit one day to the next, your body doesn't understand that stimulus. It doesn't know what it is. And that soreness tends to come when your body is exposed to new stimulus that it is not used to doing. Just because it's new and it's novel and your body doesn't quite understand it yet, it doesn't mean that it's good for muscle growth or for strength progression. It just means it's new. This is probably a really shit analogy, but hopefully you catch my drift. It's a bit like wanting to get really good at playing the guitar, deciding that you're going to try and play the recorder one day and then the drums the next, and then throwing in some trumpet. The thing that gets you good at playing the guitar is playing the guitar. And when you relate that back to the gym, I'm going to try and reel this back now. The thing that gets you strong is doing the same shit again and again and again and trying to get better each and every time. And again, the more of a beginner you are, the less it matters about the perfect program. Just tick some really basic boxes. If you're training 2 to 3 times a week, go for full body splits. Try to include a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull, and something for the core. At its most basic level, that is a nicely well-rounded full body workout. If you're training more than that, maybe you can look at splitting things up into upper body sessions and lower body sessions. But again, the what doesn't really matter as long as you're ticking some of those fundamental movement patterns and you're sticking to the same plan every time you walk in the gym. I get that you want things to be fun and exciting and new, but really when we think about strength training, it is the opposite of that. It is mastering the mundane, getting settled in to something structured and trying to be just that little bit better each time you do it. The next one is triggering, but it is so important I can't miss it out. And it's about training with enough intensity or training close enough to that point of failure. Something I see all of the time, particularly when I'm onboarding new online clients, is that we'll start training, we'll get a week or two under our belt of a new training plan. I'll check in to kind of see what weights and reps they're using. And let's say, for an example, I've given them a rep range of 10 to 12 on goblet squats. And I'm seeing something like 8 kilos for 12 reps across all 3 sets. Now that in and of itself arguably tells me that they're not training close enough to that failure point. If you can reach the top of your rep range across all of your working sets using the same weight, then more often than not, there's more in the tank. This is something I talk about in check-ins quite a lot, and it's actually something that people don't consider. They'll look at a rep range and go, right, my goal is 12. I'll get to 12 and then I'll stop. I'm just counting the reps until I get to 12. The point of a rep range is for you to work within the boundaries of that range with an appropriate load. So for someone who is training with intensity, their sets might look something like set 1, they get 12 reps at that 8 kilos. Set 2, they can only get 11 reps at that 8 kilos. Set 3, maybe they can only get 10 reps at that 8 kilos. I'm not saying this should happen all of the time, but if you look back at your training log and you see that for the last 4 weeks, you've been maxing out your rep range using exactly the same weight across each exercise, then that's a sign that you want to up the weight and drop to the lower end of that rep range. It also gives you some room to grow without just adding extra weight. If we go back to that example I just gave where we got 12, 11, 10, the next week maybe you could aim for 12, 11, 11, 12, 12, 11, 12, 12, 12. Once you get there, it's time to up the weight and drop back down to that lower bracket of your rep range. Now, a really useful tool for this is something called RPE or RIR. They both do the same thing. You can just look at them slightly differently. RPE basically means how hard from 1 to 10 was this exercise. RIR asks you how many reps you have left in the tank at the end of your set. I would recommend start asking yourself that question. When you finish your set of goblet squats, to use the same example, how many reps could you realistically have done with a gun to your head? If the answer is more than 6, you are leaving gains on the table and you are not reaching your potential. Now, having said all of that, learning to train to failure or even with sufficient intensity is a skill. And I am not suggesting that someone pretty new to training is just going to be able to walk in and train close to failure with every single exercise they do. It takes time to learn what hard actually is, how to target the muscle groups that you're wanting to target, how to nail your technique, how to manipulate tempo, how to understand the signs from your body that things are genuinely getting harder. Something that I would recommend initially if you're new to this concept is choosing exercises that are really safe to push close to that failure point. Generally speaking, the advice I'd give on this are isolation movements, single joint movements. So things like a leg extension where you are nice and supported, you're sat in a seat, all you got to do is straighten your legs. Risk of injury is almost zero. A bicep curl, same thing. You're stood up or sat down and you're just bending your elbows. Again, very, very low risk if you're new to training of you injuring yourself. Pick something like that, an isolation movement. And next time you're in the gym, pick up the same weights that you would do usually. Let's take a bicep curl. Let's say you're using the 5 kilo dumbbells. I just want you to do one full set to failure using those 5 kilos. Write down how many reps you could do. If the answer is 20, then you need to up the weight. And a really clear sign of what that failure actually means, it's less about feeling, because sensation, particularly with isolation movements, can be quite intense. You can really feel your biceps burning in a set of curls. But a more reliable measure of whether we're training close to failure is how fast those reps are. At the beginning of the set, we might be going through and it looks a little bit like this. By the end of the set, we should see that that concentric portion is physically impossible to do as quickly as it was for the first, say, 5 reps. If your rep speed is involuntarily slowing down, that is a good sign. Start with your isolations, get comfortable with that, start to learn where your failure point actually is. up the weight where needed. And as you build the confidence, you can build that into some more of those complex movements. But again, if we're not doing this, we are just not going to see any substantial muscle growth over time. You will reach that ceiling of how much you can progress and how much of that muscle mass you can build pretty quickly without that close proximity to failure. Another mistake, in my view, is an over-reliance on cardio for fat loss, for heart health, for fitness. Unmatched. Do your cardio. It is really, really good for you. But using cardio as a tool to lose as much body fat as you can is a mistake. Going back to the beginning, if your goal is to build muscle and lose fat, the number one best thing you can be doing is strength training. This is the thing that really changes your body composition, which is what we're aiming for here. When we over-rely on cardio for fat loss, what we tend to see is a whole lot of fatigue. And generally, because you're expending a lot of energy, you're going to need that energy to come back in. And how do we do that? Through food. Absolutely do your cardio, but it should be supplementary to your strength training. We can use it strategically to help us with fat loss by increasing that energy expenditure slightly, but we don't want a shit ton of running to be our main driver for that fat loss goal. Particularly if you're starting from a fairly sedentary point. Going from 0 minutes of cardio per week to 120 minutes of cardio per week is not a good strategy when it comes to that more muscle, less fat. When we think about strength training, another huge mistake I see is around choosing objectively bad exercises for muscle growth and performing them poorly. Let's start with exercise selection. Any solid strength training plan with a focus on muscle growth is going to be looking at doing one thing at a time. And what I mean by that is we don't want to be including those kind of combo movements that you see, maybe a squat into an overhead press, or maybe a lunge into a bicep curl. Think about it like this. If one of our main principles when we think about strength training is taking things within a close proximity to failure, then why are we squatting with the same weight that we're overhead pressing? It just doesn't make any sense. The muscles of the lower body are the most powerful in the body. They are the biggest, they are the strongest. So we should be making sure that we're choosing exercises that we can load appropriately for the target muscle. We also can't ignore specificity in this. If you are someone, like me, who doesn't feel that comfortable doing a standard barbell back squat, you just can't get it to feel right, your structure feels uncomfortable, you just don't feel particularly stable, then you do not have to choose that movement. There are other ways that you can do a squatting pattern in a way that feels good. For me, I like a Smith machine. It gives me that stability. It allows me to get into portions of my range of motion that I just can't do with a standard barbell. It allows me to train close to failure without that fear of being crushed under a heavy barbell because I can't get back up from a squat. I also like a leg press. Again, really supportive, easy to push close to that failure point. I like a lunge. I like a split squat. The opportunities are endless. Just because you've heard that squats are good for hypertrophy, which they are, they might not be good for you. When you're thinking about that exercise selection, firstly, is this movement targeting the muscles I want it to target? Am I able to load it effectively so that I can take it close to that failure point? Does it fit my structure, my anatomy, my flexibility, my range of motion? If you're ticking all those boxes, you're on the right track. And then execution. Honestly, this is one that I see in the gym all the time. So I'm an in-person coach as well. It's not things I see with my clients, of course, but when I look around, I see it a lot. And I'm sorry to say it's mostly the guys. It's not even the ego lifting per se, where range of motion is cut all the way short and you're swinging yourself around and grunting to get through the last few reps. It's not even that bit. It's just the speed at which these reps are performed. There doesn't seem to be much intention behind each movement. Classic example is the humble shoulder press. The amount of shoulder presses I see like this tempo, this range, like that is not the most effective way to build your delts. Unless otherwise specified, when you're following a training program, you want to be thinking about your tempo in the form of 2 to 1. And what I mean by that is the eccentric phase or the lowering phase of any movement should be around 2 seconds. The concentric or the contraction should be around 1 second. In the case of a shoulder press, we should see 1, 2, 1. Again, tempo can be used and manipulated in lots of different ways. It might be that we have a 4-second eccentric, a pause at the bottom, and then a powerful concentric. Sometimes we can intentionally slow down that concentric phase as part of a methodology within programming. But just pumping your way through half reps is not going to cut it after a certain point. And again, that range of motion piece is really important. The target muscle, we want to make sure it is in its fully lengthened position at the bottom of that movement. In this case, I'm talking about the delts. And at the top, we want them to be shortened and contracted in this position. There is a reason that these types of movements are hardest at the bottom. You want to spend your time there. That is the thing that helps this muscle get to that failure point. Really, when it comes to execution, I would say the two main mistakes are that range of motion and that tempo piece. And also, just as a general thing to consider, when you're doing a movement, this sounds obvious, but the amount of people I ask that don't know the answer is, you'd be surprised, honestly, is where you are feeling the movement working. I often ask the question after seeing a client perform a movement, where did you feel that? And they'll say, do you know what? I'm not actually that sure. Again, this is a skill. I'm not expecting you to know exactly what fiber of your shoulder muscle you felt working during that workout. But you do want to start to develop a bit of that mind to muscle connection. What is happening here? Can I feel a stretch? Can I feel a pull? Can I feel that shortening at the top? Same thing with quite literally everything you do. In a squat, can I feel my glutes lengthened and stretched at the bottom of that movement? And then can I feel them contract so that I can stand up? These sorts of things just increase your overall proprioception, your awareness of where your body is, what it is doing, and overall your training knowledge. Mistakes you do not want to make. Randomly jumping between different workouts every time you step in the gym, leaving too much in the tank in your sets and therefore not doing enough to see that muscle growth, over-relying on cardio for that specific more muscle, less fat look, poor exercise selection and execution. Let me know, please, which one you think you're guilty of, or which ones even. And if you have any questions, you can always drop them below. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time, hopefully with a working microphone. If you made it this far, thank you. I love you. Okay, see you next time. Love you, bye.